Hello, today we're going to read The Borrowers, and this is actually, I have here The Complete Adventures of the Borrowers by Mary Norton. It includes 4 different chapter books. I'm just going to read a little bit from the first book, The Borrowers. Chapter 1. Mrs. May lived in 2 rooms in Kate's parents' house in London. She was, I think, some kind of relation. Her bedroom was on the first floor, and her sitting room was a room which, as part of the house, was called the breakfast room. Now, breakfast rooms are all right in the morning when the sun streams in on the toast and marmalade, but by afternoon they seem to vanish a little and to fill with a strange silvery light their own twilight. There is a kind of sadness in them then, but as a child it was a sadness Kate liked. She would creep in to Mrs. May just before tea time, and Mrs. May would teach her to crochet. Mrs. May was old, her joints were stiff, and she was not strict exactly, but she had that inner certainty which does instead. Kate was never wild with Mrs. May, nor untidy, nor self-willed, and Mrs. May taught her many things besides crochet: how to wind wool into an egg-shaped ball, how to run and fell and plan a darn, how to tidy a drawer, and to lay like a blessing, above the contents, a sheet of rustling tissue against the dust. "Where's your work, child?" asked Mrs. May one day, when Kate sat hunched and silent upon the hassock. "You mustn't sit there dreaming. Have you lost your tongue?" "No, I've lost the crochet hook." They were making a bed quilt in woolen squares. There were 30 still to do. "I know where I put it. I put it on the bottom shelf of the bookcase, just beside my bed." "On the bottom shelf, near the floor?" Mrs. May repeated. "Yes, but I looked on the floor, under the rug, everywhere. The wool was still there, though, just where I'd left it." "Oh, dear, don't say they're in this house, too." "That what are?" asked Kate. "The borrowers," Mrs. May said, and in half light she seemed to smile. Kate stared a little fearfully. "Are there such things?" she asked after a moment. "As what?" "As people, other people living in a house who borrow things." Mrs. May laid down her work. "What do you think?" she asked. "I don't know," Kate said, pulling hard at her shoe button. "There can't be, and yet sometimes I think there must be." "Why do you think there must be?" asked Mrs. May. "Well, because of all the things that disappear. Safety pins, for instance. Factories go on making safety pins, and everyday people go on buying safety pins, and yet, somehow, there never is a safety pin just when you want one. Where are they? Now, at this moment, where do they go to? Take needles. All the needles my mother ever bought, there must be hundreds. Can't just be lying about this house." "Not lying about the house, no," agreed Mrs. May. "And all the other things we keep on buying again and again, like pencils and matchboxes and sealing wax and hairpins and drawing pins and thimbles." "And hat pins," said Mrs. May. "And blotting paper." "Oh, yes, blotting paper, but not hat pins." "That's where you're wrong. There was a reason for the hat pins." "A reason? I mean, what kind of reason?" "Well, there are 2 reasons, really. A hat pin is a really very useful weapon, but it all sounds such nonsense, and it was so very long ago." "But tell me how you know about the hat pin. Did you ever see one?" "Well, yes." "Not a hat pin, a what do you call them, a borrower?" "No, I never saw one." "But someone else saw one, and you know about it? I can see you do." "Hush, no need to shout." She gazed, upturned face, and smiled. Her eyes slid away into the distance. "I had a brother." "And he saw them?" "I don't know. I just don't know. He was such a tease. He told us so many things, my sister and me, impossible things. He was killed many years ago now on the Northwest frontier. He became colonel of his regiment. He died what they call a hero's death." "Was he your only brother?" "Well, yes, and he was our little brother, but he told us such impossible stories, and yet there was something about him. Perhaps because we were brought up in India among mystery and magic and legend, because something that made us think that he saw things that other people couldn't. Sometimes we'd know he was teasing, but at other times, well, we weren't so sure. He wasn't a very strong little boy. The first time he came home from India, he got rheumatic fever. He missed a whole term at school and was sent away to the country to get over it. To the house of a great aunt. Later I went there, and it was a strange old house. No, not yet. Please go on. But I've told you. No, you haven't. This old house wasn't that where he saw the borrowers? Yes, that's what he told us. When he'd have us believe. And what's more, it seems that he didn't just see them, but that he got to know them very well, that he became part of their lives. In fact, you might almost say that he became a borrower himself. And I'm going to stop there. We could go on and on and on. Anyway, thanks for being here today on Books with Budowitz.